Good evening, everyone. Could everyone come forward who wants to sit down? And you're also welcome to stand till your feet get tired.
And there's chairs in the back.
There are more chairs in the back, and there's 3 or 4 seats up here as well. Thank you all for coming. My name's Lisa Loomis. I'm with the Valerie Porter, and with me is my co-host, Eric Friedman, Executive Director of the Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to thank all of you for coming and thank our 4 candidates, and thank you especially for caring enough to run. I want to thank MRV TV and the Shea family and Afterthoughts for hosting us here tonight. This is a great venue, and we're excited to be here. Candidates will be giving a 1-minute prepared statement, and then we will proceed through some questions that we have, Eric and I, and then we'll take your questions, and if there's time at the end of that, we'll take questions that the candidates have prepared for each other. Please turn off your cell phones, and without further ado, I'm going to ask each candidate to start with a 1-minute opening statement, and the first question goes to Jean Bifano.
Hi, my name is Jean Bifano. This is the second time I'm...
Can you hear him?
Hello. Okay. Well, that was loud. Hi, my name is Jean Bifano. This is the second time I'm running for the House seat. The first time I had the opportunity to shake hands and drive around. This year I couldn't. I had extensive knee surgery. My doctor said no doing. So I've had a low profile, but the thing is, all the issues that were present last year are present today. I'm running because I don't want to live the valley. And all the taxes, the climate action bill, the payroll taxes, I don't want to leave, so I decided to fight, and that's why I'm here. I have extensive business career of 45 years in major corporations, solving problems and creating innovative ways to solve problems. 38 years firefighter, EMT, and 11 years as a cop. So I've experienced all these issues that people talk about in social. I've seen them in real life. I grew up in the Bronx, 5-story apartment building,
10 seconds.
top floor. So again, I'm looking to be your representative as an independent.
Thank you, Jean. John, 1 minute.
Hello, folks. Thanks for coming. I'm a lifelong Vermonter and lifelong observer of Vermont politics. We're in bad shape. Howard Dean has said there's a coming fiscal catastrophe, and he has called it a poisonous atmosphere, our current political state. That's one of the things that motivated me to run. I want to try to fix this. Our polarized government is, I think, the biggest issue. I meet people that are leaving Vermont. They can't afford it. That is unhealthy. Our governor is, I'm amazed at how many people are supportive of the governor. They say, thank God for the governor to balance out this runaway legislature. Folks, we elect this legislature. We can stop this if and when we want to. We can stop at this election. If you've had enough, you want to vote for me and send me as an independent to Montpelier. If you want to keep on with this pain, you can send the incumbent back to Montpelier.
Thank you, John. Dara, 1 minute.
Hi, everyone. Little bit spicy this time with my neighbor, John. It's been an amazing experience to be your state rep over the last 2 years. And it's been a historic term. We had unbelievable highs and lows over the last 2 years. I've learned an incredible amount. I got to serve with Rep. Dolan, who is an inspiration, who accomplished so much for our valley. And I want to run, and I want to serve again. I want to be able to put what I've learned into play on your behalf. And I want to share with you my sense that it's not poisonous at all. We do have some political tension with the governor and the administration that we could work better together for sure. But for me, the biggest challenge we face is the capacity of our government, both our administration, our agencies, and our state house, our legislators, in having the information and resources they need to meet these big issues we face.
Thank you, Dara. Candice?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Candice White. I'm running for state representative also. I've lived in Waitsfield for a little bit more than 20 years, and I call Vermont home, although I'm not a native Vermonter. I grew up in upstate New York and North Carolina. went to Boston for college, and I was there for about 20 years before I came to Vermont in 2003. I have a pretty extensive professional background. I worked for national magazines in Boston and New York. I've been a freelance writer and editor, and then I served on Sugarbush's executive team for 10 years before going into communications consulting, which I continue to do. I've also volunteered extensively. I was president of the Waitsfield PTA. I served on the Central Vermont Economic Development Corporation Board
10 seconds.
for 6 years and was chair, and I currently co-chair the Vermont Women's Fund. I'm a collaborator. I like to solve problems. I am committed to working across
That's
the
1
aisle
minute.
to solve our problems and make Vermont better. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm handing the mic over to Eric for our first prepared question, and this one starts with John.
With Jean? No, we're sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. Our first question for today is, Vermont's recent property tax increase was passed after overriding Governor Scott's veto. How did you or would you justify the necessity of this increase? And how do you plan to ensure that middle class and working class families aren't disproportionately affected?
Well, if I understand the question, I would not justify the necessity of the increase of the property tax. It is another, as I understand it, it's the last 5 years the property taxes have increased over 10% each year. And we kind of lost track of that in COVID a bit when it was kind of hidden by the sales tax. But did I understand the question correctly? I do not justify that increase. Right, so, and that is one of the main issues, one of the biggest issues, and reason that I'm running, is to find some fix, help find some fix for this property tax issue that has been going on. I remember the first year Phil Scott was in office, he said, we've got to fix property taxes. He's running for his 5th term, and it is
10 seconds,
it is
John.
this property tax increase has gotten worse. It is broken. I was looking on Candice's website, I think, yesterday. She said it's broken. I think we all agree it's
Time.
broken.
Thank you. Let's hear from Dara.
Okay, so yes, our property tax liability that we're all struggling with is untenable, and it's going to erode our ability to have a rich community of diverse people. And so it's a crisis. I think there's wide agreement that we need to address affordability in the state, and we do understand that the cost of education is a big driver, and that that's going to take a lot of attention in right-sizing our education system while preserving quality. And then we need a fairer way to distribute the burden, and we have to look at maybe beyond property taxes for how we do that. And we do currently have income subsidy to help people below $128,000 to
10 seconds.
pay for their property taxes. But because 70% of Vermonters are already getting some sort of support for income, we're thinking perhaps of moving away from
That's
the property
time.
tax.
Candice?
So, okay, I would not have voted for that. I don't, if I were in the legislature. I think that the property tax increase was, insulting is not the right word, but I think everybody was pretty flabbergasted with the increases. And it's reflective of a school funding system which is broken. And this is not news, but it seems to have come to a head this year. I really think that we need to try to just blow up the school funding mechanism and redo it. It was figured out almost 25 years ago, and it's causing unintended consequences. And a lot of people in our county can't afford to live here and are worrying about where to go. So other states have property tax caps. I think that is something to consider.
That's 10 seconds to go.
I also think we need to look at spending. So not just, where we can get more money, but I think we've got to prioritize our school spending and pay for what's most important and cut some things we can't
That's time.
afford.
Thank you, Candice. Jean?
I agree with John. I agree with John. tax increase was untoward. And the reason is the beginning, when they created Act 60, its base, the way it decided to do it is fault. It was flared. They went after our ski towns. The law was structured so they would go after the second homeowners in Vermont. The problem is they didn't realize that when they did that, they would also affect the people who lived here. Then they created Act 68, which is income assistance. But then they realized that 70% of those people are on income assistance, so somebody had to make up the difference. You keep going, trying to fix it. Candice is right. The whole system's got to be redone. And it really has to do things like Burlington should not be getting our tax money, and they do. Their budget's $119 million. They have 3 academies.
10 seconds.
So anyway, the system's broken. It needs to be fixed, but the structure of the schools have to be fixed. There's nothing we can do. There's no extra money anywhere because we're already tapping sales tax
That's time.
and income.
Thank you, Jean. Before I read the next question, there are 3 seats, 4 seats, 5 seats, 6 seats up front if anybody does not want to stand. Okay. The next question will start with Dara. Given the direct consumer costs associated with the Vermont Clean Heat Standard, do you support it? Why or why not? How would you achieve similar reductions in carbon emissions without directly impacting those who can least afford it?
Okay, in 1 minute, this will be challenging. It's a very complicated bill, but the idea behind it is a good one. It's the plan that we need to follow to get our fossil fuel energy system transitioned to cleaner alternatives. Our heating is a big part of what we spend our money on, and there are a lot of ways we can still be warm in our homes without having to continue to pollute. So the idea behind it is that we would have a managed transition, that we would have a way of raising money to fund it in an ongoing way. It's a good idea, and all it is right now is an idea. It's being vetted currently, and a rule will be drafted for the legislators to consider in January, and the issue of cost
10
is
seconds.
really, really important. So cost will be something that could prevent this particular type of plan from happening, but
That's time. Thank you. Candice?
So we all are seeing the results of climate change. So we know that having a climate change policy is the right thing for Vermont. I'm not sure the clean heat standard is the right approach within climate change. I just looked at a report that actually John shared from the Public Utility Commission looking at the clean heat standard, and some of the determinations were, Vermont is too small and this is too costly for Vermont, creating this credit marketplace and third parties to administer it. I'd really like us to see, we have to focus on affordability. And so, why don't we look at new construction and let's make sure new construction has clean heat standards going forward. And so we'll start building new clean heat buildings, and then we'll take a look at our existing buildings and
10 seconds.
homes. And, but we need to make changes that Vermonters can afford. And I think the clean heat standard is just causing too much consternation
That's
about
time.
cost.
Thank you, Candice. Jean?
So I agree that the clean heat standard, in fact, what I read was Efficiency Vermont was given the task of managing it, and they realized that it couldn't be done. They told the PUC it couldn't be done, so the whole thing is scrapped right now, has to go back to the legislature, but that is absolutely the wrong way to do it. In fact, everything, all these climate bills that have been proposed are going to cost more money than we have, and they're not going to accomplish their goal. When you think about Vermont, it is a small state. We have the second smallest carbon footprint in the country, which makes us really small, and we're trying to squeeze blood out of this turnip. When we look at the global environment, China has 1,142 coal plants. They're building 17 more. India, all these countries are not following the rules. So whatever we do here in Vermont is de minimis, but we
10 seconds.
We can do things to figure out how to lower the carbon footprint without going bankrupt. And all these bills put together, we can't afford. No way.
All right, thank you, Gene. Our next question, we're going to start with Candice.
Wait, I didn't go.
Oh, I'm sorry, John, I forgot about you. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you. Right, so clean heat standard, Gene's right. Vermont's a small state. We're already a very clean living state, and we're a drop in the bucket compared to China, India, these other nations that put out tons of pollution. The clean heat standard is not needed. It's an experiment. I've already said I will vote no for it if I'm there, no on it if I'm there in January. I'll cut to the chase, though, with the Clean Heat Standard is to support this Global Warming Solutions Act. That's the law that was passed a couple years ago, which included the provision that if we don't meet these standards, we're subject to being sued. Okay, so if you're a legislator and you create a law that says, by the way, if we don't do this, we're going to allow ourselves to be sued, that's called malfeasance. You're not doing your job. You're
10 seconds,
violating
John.
your oath to protect people, to allow them to be subject to lawsuits. That is backwards legislation.
Okay, thank you, John. Our next question, we're going to start with Candice this time. Rising taxes and costs of living have impacted small businesses in the Mad River Valley. How do you plan to support local entrepreneurs and small business owners in a way that ensures their continued success and contribution to the community?
You know, one of the issues I think small businesses are facing, Eric, is a lack of affordable housing for their employees. And if employees can't afford to live here, they can't work here. So, you know, I think the affordable housing issue is affecting so many industries. And, you know, can you guys hear me okay? Okay. You know, some of the Act 250 changes in the last legislature, I think, are positive, and it's supposed to make it easier to develop in, you know, urban areas, concentrated areas like downtown Waitsfield. You know, whether or not Sugarbush up in the mountains should be another designated area, I would suggest it might make sense because they also have a lot of infrastructure that has already been built and they're already working on
10
affordable
seconds.
housing projects. So I look at housing as a real savior for that.
Yep, Gene?
So one of the things we can do, there are a lot of payroll taxes, 2 payroll taxes that our businesses have to pay. And when they pay that, we pay that. So we need to look at what they were done. The Family Leave Act is a total disaster. The governor had a better plan to provide family leave to all working Vermonters. This law hires 55 people according to the Joint Fiscal Committee of the Assembly. They're going to hire 55 people to administer, so the people paying in are paying for these employees. The point is, housing is an issue. It is a regional issue. And the fact that people can't work or live in the town they work in, I commuted my whole career. At one time, I drove 70 miles each way because that's where my job was. So we have to find places where we can build affordable housing, but the key is
10 seconds.
we don't pay for it. We make it available and reasonable for developers to spend their money to build affordable housing. Change the tax rules, change the planning, change it. So,
John?
Yeah, I agree. Housing is what I'm calling a fundamental issue, that so many things come back to housing and the lack of housing. As I walk around, I meet people that are, where are my kids going to live when they grow up? And there's no, and that the lack of housing directly relates to and contributes to the cost of living, this enormous cost of living. But your question about the community, local community, I'll go back to the school property tax issue again. There is so much money that has just been diverted into the school system, and it seems like a black hole. There has got to be some money in there and a way to fix that education funding system that allows there to just be more money overall, just to be put back into the community for things like recreation paths, for community amenities, for just local level things. Right now, that money all goes into this black hole of the education funding system.
Thank you. Dara?
Yes. I shouldn't have touched it. I would add, I mean, housing for sure is definitely
Can you hear Dara?
a drag on our businesses as well. And we did do good work to try to at least on the regulatory side and the land use side, make it easier for housing to be developed. But there is a lot more that has to come into play to make that happen. The other good things that we accomplished that can help our businesses is with workforce. We've invested a lot in workforce and workforce training, but also in making childcare more available and higher quality. We've brought on 1,000 more spots in our childcare centers, and that allows people to actually work. So that's an investment we made and we need to continue to make.
10 seconds.
And the other thing I see our businesses really needing is more support when they get flooded and have impacts from climate change.
Thank you. Time.
The next question, we are going to start with Jean again. The negotiated increase in the cost of healthcare coverage for educators and school staff is 18 to 20% this year. There's no we can selectively reduce programming in our schools to absorb such a large increase. How will you help our district and others in the state that are impacted by this contract, which is negotiated at state level and imposed on us? Can educators' health care be part of the Vermont State Employees Contract? What are your solutions?
If you look at any business, the biggest expense any business is the basic. So if we look at business, the biggest expenses are employees and healthcare costs. There are plenty of people in this valley who do not have healthcare coverage. There are plenty of people that pay an awful lot. So I think we have to look at how these contracts are negotiated, and they shouldn't be that generous because we are paying for it. There are people here that can't even afford insurance, and they are the ones that are paying for it. So I think we have to go back and look at that whole negotiation process because all that cost feeds into the cost of education. Clearly, people need health care costs, but the whole system is broken, and we need to look at that. I mean, there are so many broken systems here, by the way, but we
10
need to fix
seconds.
that.
Thank you. John?
Okay, interesting question. I've always wondered why teachers aren't just state employees. Why can't they just be made state employees? Would that be okay? I was a state employee. It was pretty good. I know a lot of state employees. They seem to have it pretty good. They're pretty happy with their health care, with their benefits. It's good. It seems like a good, stable employment. So I don't understand. I don't have enough information right now to understand why the NEA has such influence that they have seemed to carve out a separate place for themselves in Vermont while we also have Vermont state employees, unions, and contracts. Could those just be combined? That seems simple. That seems
10 seconds.
That seems efficient. I think our government could use efficiency in many ways.
Thank you, John. Dara?
Yes, healthcare was one of the major cost drivers of the spike in education budgets. And I think it even amounted to, in our case, 5 cents on the tax rate. So it's real, and it's, I don't know if you've been tracking the healthcare study that came out recently, but our whole healthcare system is very expensive and unsustainable, and our health insurance premiums are out of sight. And there's no relief in sight unless we really reform how healthcare is delivered in our state. And it's very similar to the prescription for our schools, and the fact that we have this diffuse population all over the state with needs everywhere, but not scale, means we have a lot of cost. So we have to do the same thing that we're doing in education, in healthcare.
10 seconds.
And one of the practical things we might be able to do in the interim, in addition to thinking about the state employee issue that's been brought up, is reference-based pricing and other strategies
Dara.
to lower costs.
Thank you. That's time. Candice?
So just following up on what Dara was saying, I was actually just listening to the part of that Green Mountain Care Board presentation today. The healthcare situation in Vermont is like very dire, and the predictions, like when we get to 2028, are that I think most all of the hospitals will be in bankruptcy. I mean, it's pretty dire. So, and we have, it sounds like maybe too many hospitals, maybe too many schools, but then we need housing. So, is there some opportunity there for reimagining some of these buildings that we can't afford? I don't work in healthcare. I'm not going to pretend to have an answer for healthcare other than to say that
10 seconds.
healthcare costs are impacting so many other sectors of Vermont, and it really requires some hard work and some major changes. And it sounds like the Green Mountain Care Board is going in that direction.
The next question is about housing. Vermont's housing crisis is affecting families and businesses alike. What is your plan for expanding access to affordable housing in Vermont, and how can we ensure that development balances growth with the preservation of Vermont's unique character? I'm going to start with John.
Just a little follow-up. I was reading a report on from the Green Mountain Care Board, and they said the number one issue to address health care issues is housing, build housing. Again, it's a fundamental issue for so many things. Act 250 reform, it didn't go far enough. We have to be able to build also in communities like this. I've seen some of the building, I've heard some of the stories of local builders who are just swamped with tens of thousands of dollars in fees just to build 10 or 20 houses. That's not necessary. It shouldn't be that hard to build some houses. We can balance building nice new houses with keeping our environmental approach to Vermont and just
10 seconds.
living in concert with the land. There's a way to do that. We have room to build, and we need to do so.
Thanks. Thank you, John. Dara?
Could you repeat the question?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Vermont's housing crisis is affecting families and businesses alike. What is your plan for expanding access to affordable housing in Vermont, and how can we ensure that development balances growth with the preservation of Vermont's unique character?
Right. So our work on the Act 250 statute was pretty monumental this term. It was decades in the making to reform it and to make it easier to build in the right places and protect the really fragile areas that we need to protect. In terms of where we live, we are in, we have our village centers, but we also have a lot of what is called Tier 2 in the new approach. And that is an area that's going to be studied a lot more in the next term. And I would really like to be involved in that because I want to see areas like ours be able to accommodate more people. And then the other big thing that we need for housing and affordable housing is a sustained funding of it. We have had a lot of money, the ARPA money from during the pandemic.
10 seconds.
And we invested in many, many developments, but we have to keep at it. And that's why we worked hard and found a way to fund more
That's
affordable
time.
housing.
Candice?
So, yes, we need more affordable housing, and that's affecting a lot of different industries. I'd love to see, I think this is an opportunity for some big creative thinking, and I think Jean mentioned getting the private sector involved, relying on developers, but I'd like to see developers, they're nonprofits working on this problem, regional development corporations I talked about, I've had some experience working with them, but they are set up around the state and are really great resources in terms of knowing the businesses in their counties and being able to pool different businesses. If we were to get together architects and developers and clean energy environmentalists and just do some brainstorming.
10 seconds.
I think we could come up with some good ideas for how to fast track affordable housing, but really embracing all different, not just business, not just the state, not just the feds.
That's a minute. Thank you. Jean?
So it is a complicated issue, but government spending really isn't the the appropriate way to do it. There are ways to do your planning, your zoning. I just read that Waitsfield was going to donate land to a developer to build reasonable housing. Affordable housing is a very specific term used by HUD. What we're talking about is housing for people who work but need something they can afford. And the issue there is when you build affordable housing and you give somebody a house for $4,000, $400,000, $450,000, 2 years from now, that house is going to be worth $600,000, and they're going to sell that house, and they're going to make a profit. And guess what happens? Your affordable housing goes out the door. So we first have to know who these people are and what we're going to build. Are we going to build garden apartments? Are we going to build townhouses? Let's figure out who
10
needs
seconds.
housing and what kind of housing we're going to pay for, and then give developers the wherewithal to go do this and minimize the amount of money we're
That's a
taking out
minute.
of our
Thank you.
pockets to pay somebody else's housing.
This next question starts with Dara. The Mad River Valley and Waterbury have seen 3 floods in 18 months, as have Montpelier, Barre, and other parts of central Vermont. How many times do you think it is reasonable to rebuild in the same location after flooding? As a legislator, how will you help people move homes and businesses out of harm's way, and how will you fund that?
Yes, that's a good question. You know, some people are choosing to elevate their homes and fill in their basements. Some people decide to actually do a buyout. And what we've learned is there's a real gap in time for that FEMA federal buyout money to come to homeowners who make that hard choice. And so one thing I would like to see our state do is figure out how to fill in the gap and be able to fund those buyouts so people aren't on the hook for a long time waiting. And then at the same time, we have to have a place for them to go. We don't want to lose people from our communities. So we should think about a land bank and think about having a place set aside for that's safer and that combines with our plans for housing.
10 seconds.
And that's what I'd like to see. And more help for the individuals as they are facing damage to their driveways.
Thank you, Dara. Candice?
So the flooding devastation, continues. And, I was doing some door knocking in Facein and Waitsfield and saw people who'd lost cars, whose houses had been condemned. So we know it's real and it's continuing. What's the best way to solve that? I went to a Mad River Valley Planning District meeting a couple weeks ago, and Josh Schwartz gave a great presentation on Hurricane Irene and what we learned from Hurricane Irene, and we looked at changes that Waitsfield made to the town area that was flooded after Irene, and there were some really great changes. So, I think we need to just continue to look at where the damage is, and we can't continue to rebuild
10
buildings that are
seconds.
in harm's way. We need to relocate those, and by learning from the storms and careful planning, I think we can help our community get to a better place.
That's 1 minute. Jean?
So continued flooding will, if we all accept that climate change is changing the dynamics and this water would keep coming. So one of the things I keep thinking about, the state did a study, and from what I read, they can only implement 33% of the mitigation recommendations that they had, and they say, we don't have the money. So I look around and say, where can we get this money? Now, there's tons of money was set aside for all this climate change, all these bills. I read someplace somewhere in $250 million. So let's start looking at money set aside for the future and spend it today. We should think about how we can dam or create avenues for that water to flow around cities like Montpelier,
10
and maybe
seconds.
start thinking about how we might be able to use that extra water energy to create electricity. Dams are a great source, and some people don't, but we look at Hoover
Time,
Dam.
John.
We're lucky, Green Mountain Power, we get
Thank you,
60%.
Jean. John?
Okay, flooding, so this is climate change impact in Vermont. When we look at global warming solutions and clean heat standards, these are distractions from what's happening in Vermont that's really impacting Vermonters' lives. So let's stop going with these schemes and these fancy plans to save the world from climate change, and let's help Vermonters. I do think there is things we can do to prevent flooding. The answer is once. Maybe once. You rebuild once, and that's it. People shouldn't have to go through that more than once. The Secretary of Natural Resources, Julie Moore, has said, this may sound funny coming from the Secretary of A&R, but we need to look at things like moving our rivers, dredging, opening up floodplains, diverting water, and that can be done with a minimal environmental impact. New Orleans is holding back the
10
ocean in some
seconds.
form after their major flood years ago. So I think we can do some things to adjust rivers and prevent flooding again.
Thank you, John. We're going to take a little break and start taking some questions from the audience. At this point, does anyone have a question that they would like to ask?
I'm going to be bringing the microphone to you, and we'd like you to state your name and hometown, please. So just raise your hand, we'll bring you the microphone, and don't be shy.
Suzanne Lowen Fayston. Dara, you mentioned land banks. Can you talk more about that idea?
I don't know a whole lot about it, but I know there's a senator who is championing the idea, but it's basically for a town, a municipality, to plan ahead and start procuring some land that can be then deployed when needed, because people who've lost their homes should be prioritized, I think, when they're making that difficult choice. And I've been helping at some flood relief in Waterbury, actually, with my husband, and we went to a house that had been flooded twice and was actually a mobile home type structure that could easily be moved.
Kai Koich, I live in Fayston. Seems like in the valley a lot of houses are getting gobbled up for short-term rentals. How is that contributing? How much is that contributing to our housing problem? It seems like it's pretty significant.
Is that for everyone?
Sure.
So then that question will start with you, Candice.
So short-term rentals, they may be a problem. I mean, on the one hand, I think they bring a lot of people. Is this working? Okay. You know, people who come for ski vacations, they offer more beds. When I was at Sugarbush, Wynn used to always say we don't have enough bed base in the valley, so short-term rentals were helpful. But on the other hand, you know, are they kicking out families who need to be living here full time? You know, Warren is working on a short-term rental policy, which I think the rest of the valley is planning on adopting. And that's basically just, they're going to start collecting information so that we know how many short-term rentals, you know, who owns them, and start to get some data so that we can do something with it. So I don't want to say whether they're good or bad, but I think data collection and knowing what we've got is the first step.
That is a big issue, and I do believe that short-term rentals are taking money out of the rental stock. Last term when I ran around shaking hands with people, we found out that many homeowners switched to short-term rentals because they got tired of renting properties where they were always fighting with their tenants. And in Vermont, trying to get somebody out of your house is a major issue. In fact, Vermont needs a squatter law because people can move into your house. And we can manage short-term rentals because there's three types. There's corporate, somebody who has a house and wants to rent a spot, and there's also the condos, which manage their own stuff. But it is an issue, and Warren is working on it, and I submitted a whole document on how best to do it. And part of all of these rules, you need enforcement, because Warren's had no enforcement in there. But we do need to work on that, and we need that rental property for people who can rent a season, the seasonal employees. So it can be fixed.
My sense of short-term rentals is that, sure, it's becoming a thing, but I'll go back to housing. And I don't think that short-term rentals should become an issue to be fixed now and put effort and energy into it and lose sight of the fact that we need to build housing, because again, that's a foundational issue. That's a bigger issue. And I think eventually the market will catch up with short-term rentals to whatever extent is needed for regulation or having a registry and understanding more how they impact the economy. But again, the bigger issue is housing, allowing housing to be built, and let's not get distracted by other issues like short-term rentals, important issue, but could be it is not as big of an issue as building long-term housing.
You know, in a housing crisis, everything matters, and there are people who are suffering and not finding rentals. We all know them. We see it on Front Porch Forum. So I think the most important thing to start with is information. We are missing information. We don't have a rental registry in the state. We do not know how many rentals we have. And that's a simple thing that we could add so that if you're a landlord, you register your property and then we have data. We know how many rentals we have. And that's not just for dealing with short-term rentals, but it's also dealing with emergencies like we've been having. And knowing where people live is important. And knowing what the standards of the housing that they're living in is important. So I would really encourage that we pursue that. And it's been in the legislature for a while, but been vetoed by the governor.
Yeah, anyone have questions? Yeah.
Warren Koss from Warren. Was it? I don't think it's on. Candice, you were in the government during this recent tax increase bill. So I'd be curious, I'm sorry, Eva. Sorry, I got the wrong, got my glasses. Sorry. You were in the government during the recent tax increase bill, and it was the veto was overridden. What was your vote on that?
So the bill you're referring to is the yield bill, which is a must-pass bill that every year the legislature figures out how much all the school budgets in the whole state add up to, and then they have to figure out how to pay the tab. So it wouldn't be responsible to veto a bill like that. I think it was a political stunt, which was very useful during an election year, but the reality was that we had to come up with the money and try to do our best to limit the impact to property taxpayers without digging a big hole for next year, because that's what happens. So we were given an alternative at the last minute that would have provided more of a bridge funding to kind of lessen the impact, but that would have dug a really big hole, and our joint fiscal office, who provides us with bipartisan information, told us that that would result in like $82 million of extra. I voted for the bill.
Judy Daly, Moortown, and this question's for Dara. JJ mentioned the atmosphere at the State House, and you're the only person on the panel who's been at the State House. And JJ, I'm sorry, I forget your exact word, but it was something along the lines of toxic, but I know that was not your word. But lack of working together is something that was brought up. Dara, can you talk about what efforts you've made in your time there to work tripartisan and with the governor, and what you would continue to do?
Thank you for that question. Like I said in my opening statement, my experience in the State House has been very positive in terms of collegiality. I sat right in among a lot of Republicans, and I had good relationships with them and in my committee, and learned alongside them. And I didn't really feel any kind of toxicity from other legislators. I think what we're hearing about is more between the administration and the legislature. And that's, again, not really something I'm not in leadership in the party, so I don't have a lot of access to backroom negotiations and things like that. So I can't really speak to that. But I did experience, just in running again, I felt very thrown under the bus by the governor. I felt targeted as a legislator, and there were death threats because of the way he spun the property tax increase that I didn't appreciate. So I think it's been politics.
Can you all hear me? I appreciate that Dara is on the hot seat and she's the incumbent, but I also think we do want to hear from all the candidates. So it's fine to target your question for Dara, but I think it's also good to then either address the question to the other candidates or phrase the question in a way that the other candidates want. So Eric is out there, raise your hand and we will find you. Have at it.
Up here. I live in Warren, and I wanted to kind of follow on that question about working together in Montpelier, and really for everyone, because every flyer I've gotten from the candidate says we're going to cooperate. I was at a meeting where I talked with Bill Scott the other day. He said the Democratic supermajority came to him and said it's going to be our way or the highway, and we're pushing through everything we want. Doesn't matter what you think. And he said that was the environment that he had. So going forward, how will you change that environment? And do you plan on continuing, particularly the Democrats, this push through whatever we want regardless? And we've seen the effect of it with our higher taxes and future higher costs.
Well, there's a Democratic representative, John Hooper from Randolph, a four-term candidate. Well, I'm speaking pretty close. Is that okay? So there's a Democratic representative, John Hooper, four-term Democrat, his father. He took his father's seat. And he said the exact same thing. He said there's a problem. There is not representative government. The supermajority controls the Senate and the House. And he also further said, and there's an article written in the Daily Vermont Chronicle, that 10 people run the organization. So the only way to cure this is to reduce the supermajority, just to elect 2 independents, and that helps change the dynamic, because I'm a fighter, and John's an Army colonel, so we're both fighters. We will go up there, we won't tolerate it, and we will work with people to solve the problems, but they have to leave their political ideas and their dogma outside the door, and let's sit down and discuss it. But it is true, the supermajority controls, and 12 out of the 13 were vetoed, and they all will create economic havoc here in this state.
So I mentioned I'm a lifelong observer. Since I was a kid, I had relatives in politics, so I always paid close attention. And it used to be okay. Both sides would get something, they'd go home, and it was politics. Now it's not okay. This supermajority does whatever they want, and they make that very apparent. They don't even bother to say the platitudes of, well, we're going to try to lower your taxes. You can see Phil Baruth on video saying exactly what the question implied, that they just say, ignore the Republicans, you don't need to, we have the majority, we have the numbers, we're going to do what we want, you don't need to bother to even consider the opinions of the other side. That is unhealthy and unbalanced government. In the old days, it would be, well, we're going to win this one, but we'll give 1 or 2 to the other side just for good feelings, and the people of the state would feel better about that.
Yes, I would say, I don't really think it's so much the supermajority being like a unit on all issues, and that really the vetoes that we see, a lot of them were very collaborative bills that were tripartisan, and then were vetoed anyway. So I don't know that you can read that much into it. I do believe that what we see, I think the bigger issue is really a different opinion of government and the role that it needs to play in the Vermont we live in today with the problems that we're facing today. I believe in a more expansive role for government because we need the services and the action of government to do what we need to do to face the climate challenges and the healthcare challenges and the housing struggles that we're facing. And others feel a different way towards government. And so I think that's the tension. It's a real tension. It's always been there.
So without being in the legislature, I'm just hearing what we're all hearing. And it did seem like, I always thought that Vermont politics were more respectful than national politics. Although this year it didn't feel like that. It felt pretty divisive. And so I don't know where the breakdown went, or where it happened, but, I believe strongly that people in the legislature need to work with the governor's office. I don't know if there's not enough communication. I'm not sure where the breakdown is, but we need to be able to talk to all sides, hear from all different types of people. And the governor's a very popular governor, and I've supported the governor, and I'll continue to support him. And I think it's really important to hear different points of view and solve problems. Like, no, but we don't really care if it's the governor's fault, if it's the legislature's fault. We just need to solve the problems.
Tim Senna from Warren. I'm wondering what your opinions are on term limits. We seem to have legislators and senators and a governor at this point that stay in for multiple terms. I would personally like to see longer terms and term limits. What are your feelings on that?
I'm open to term limits. I think it's a good concept. I don't have hard numbers or specific times. Did you say you're open to more? You said longer terms. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. I mean, I'm open to the concept of term limits, and I think there's room for that, certainly.
I would agree. I'd like to explore it in Vermont. I noticed a lot of senior senators who basically worked right up to the end. We had those deaths, wonderful public servants, but it does seem like at some point there should be some term limits, and we're going on 8 years with our current governor. So I would like to explore that.
Yep, I would agree with Dara and John. Term limits sound like a good idea. And I think, when we look at these career legislators, is that why they're just kind of going with the party line? And, I think you need to be brave and you need to stand up for what you believe in. And if that gets you out of, if you're voted out of office because you did that, well, okay. But, I think that being a career politician is not great, and that there should be opportunities for other people to join politics, bring in new ideas, and then move on.
Sure enough. I absolutely agree with term limits. When I ran for mayor in my village in Westchester County, I proposed term limits because what I saw, and this is kind of funny, but a good friend of mine was elected after second term. When he first got elected, it was our village. And after he got elected the third time, it was his village. That happens to politicians. That happens to people. So I would suggest something like 3 years for House of Representatives, 3 for senators, and you get 2 of those. And then you're out, because the longer you're in there, and in New York State, these guys were in there for a long time. They became very powerful because they're owed favors, they give favors, and people come to them, and that is a bad situation. So I'm all for that. In fact, if you elect me, I guarantee you I'm not going to be there more than 2 terms because I'll be 82, 86. So I don't want to do that. I want to relax a bit.
Thank you, Gene. And so we had a unanimous answer on that, just pointing that out for the record. They all in favor of term limits. Eric, what do you have for us out there?
Any more questions out here?
Anyone in the far corner? Questions? Don't be shy. We want to hear from you.
Hello, my name is Michael Dool. I'm from Fayston, and thank you everybody for doing this. We talked about need for more housing, fairly unanimous on that. We also talked about the need for some revenue. And just anecdotally, I'm looking around as I drive around the valley, there's a significant amount of empty houses. These are second homes owned by people, oftentimes not even in the state. What are your thoughts about perhaps working this nexus of these three things to try to encourage people to either live in the homes and contribute to the valley, or pony up some extra cash or their housings, so that we don't have as many empty houses and we don't have a tax base that's on a very limited amount of people? Thank you. To everybody, I hope. Yeah.
Okay. I love that question. I've had a wonderful time connecting with people all over the valley this election season and in general. But recently being in Warren, it's been heartbreaking to hear from people, to talk about how they feel the community being diminished by just the absence, the emptiness. And that's something that we can do on the local level. It doesn't take the state, really. We could change the way the types of homes we incentivize. Like, we could have size limits. Our zoning could do some things. We could decide, we have already done some work that's going to make it harder to do the trophy home up the mountain with a big, long driveway. We want to be intentional about where we build the housing and the type that we're building. It needs to be housing that fits the people that we have here, small household size, older people. So, I think there are strategies that we could look at locally to have the kind of community that we really want. And then I think there's also, on the state level, there's things that we could do with taxation on second homes that could perhaps be a disincentive, or reinvest that into good things.
So I'm going to agree partially with Dara in that I think that there are some opportunities for making changes on the local level that would solve some of these problems for our homes in our county. A constituent was sharing with me, and I'm not going to remember the details, but he had been visiting a place outside the state recently and talked about there were some regulations about homes in kind of the town centers of this area, and I think it was local legislation that made sure that people who bought the houses in these concentrated areas were full-time residents, so that, so Warren Village, for example, like, could we say we want to have full-time residents live in Warren Village? But, if you're going to have a second home on the mountain, that's not as concentrated and kind of as vibrant to the city, the community center.
So it sounds like a good idea, but if you go look at who pays our school tax, if you go to the Joint Fiscal Committee, 30% of the school taxes are paid by second homeowners. In fact, Act 60 was designed specifically to go after second homeowners in ski towns. There are things we can do. As a mayor, we actually changed the dynamics. We did pass legislation on the size of houses. I passed a tree ordinance, and I'm not a tree hugger, but we wanted to make sure that when they built the houses, they didn't destroy the environment. So there are ways to deal with it. And if you look at second homeowners, they provide the second biggest business in the valley. That's property management. I mean, if you look at the condos, all these houses, all the property managers, that is big income. So they are contributing. And the other part of the story, the kids aren't going to school. So it's a good idea, but I think they're already paying a lot. And if you make it too high, guess what? They pick up the bag and go.
Yeah, big issue here. You're mentioning having them, second homeowners paying more money, pay extra cash. I've heard that. That's an idea, certainly, but the problem is the school system is broken. The education funding system is broken, right? So I'm not in favor of saying, hey, you can pay more, so pay more to pay into a broken system. My thought is fix the system first, have some fundamental structural reform on the education funding system before we ask people to pay more money into it. But your question also brings up, I see a lot of empty houses in terms of they look abandoned and they're no longer used, and we have a homeless crisis and a homelessness crisis, a housing crisis and homelessness crisis. So I see a lot of empty houses just sitting idle. And are those opportunities for development? There's already a footprint. There's already some sewage. There's a curb cut. There's a place to develop, something to work with. So.
Hi, my name is Karen. I live in Warren. We've all talked about how the education funding system is broken. I'd like to know what some of your ideas for fixing it are.
Okay, fixing school funding. I think the formula needs to be just looked at. I couldn't really tell you what it is. I think a lot of us couldn't really say what it is. We know that we vote on our school budgets, and it goes into Montpelier, and then it comes out with a pretty high price tag, and nobody seems to understand how that happens. I think there's opportunity for cutting some costs in the current school budget. When you look nationally, enrollment is dropping nationally. Vermont, we have the lowest teacher-to-student ratio in the country. We also are the 3rd or 5th highest spending per pupil in the country. So, there's some adjustments that I think can be made without our suffering terribly. There are other programs like, I'll stop there.
Well, there are solutions. One of the things that really irks me the most is that Burlington gets our money. I was a mayor of a town of 8,800 people, and we supported our own schools, and we paid our teachers equivalent salaries to where we lived. We had a police department. We had so many services for the same amount of money I was paying in Vermont, where we get no services other than schools. So the school system has to be redesigned. But the first thing I would do is say any community over 8,800 people and has that revenue service, they do their own schools. They can do it. And then we have to figure out how we're going to consolidate the 120 small schools. The town of Whiting, where the suit came from, 450 people in the town, 30 of them were going to school, and it was all farmland, so you cannot derive revenue from farms. So we have to look at how that structure is, and we have to get rid of it and start by getting communities to support their own schools by developing mass.
Solution, how about a spending cap? Spending caps, there's ways to do this. And I looked today, there's 46 states that have some kind of limit spending cap. Vermont and 3 other states don't have this. How about just a limit on education funding, education spending? You can only go up this much each year. Right now, it's a blank check. Who gets a blank check? What organization, what system has a blank check, unlimited funding? It's not reasonable, yet we allow it to happen. This local control idea is starting to seem to me like a myth. The only local control we have really is to vote our budget down, to say no. And the idea that, no matter how we vote, our taxes are still subject to go up because of the statewide system, and start over. Burn it down, start over. Start over. I've heard this. We've had 27 years of experience, different laws and Band-Aids along the way. We got enough in there to figure out one good way to do this.
We do have a committee that's convening right now, looking at different funding strategies, and that information is going to be available to the legislators by December. So there'll be some new models and structures to consider. The ones that I'm aware of that appeal to me kind of move away from the money following the student and give some fixed costs to the schools. So they have, you know, what the things that don't matter, like the student count doesn't affect, things about the building can be funded with more certainty. And then the things that are more discretionary could be funded differently or voted on. So, I mean, there's a lot of things. I don't know about spending caps. I know we've had them in the past. Sometimes they lead to excess spending because then districts are incentivized to spend up to the cap. So, I mean, there's a lot of complexity there, and I'm really looking for expert opinions on this, and we have that coming.
I'm going to follow up with a question that the comments on that last question made me come back to. John, you alluded to it with spending caps, and Jean, you mentioned the Supreme Court decision, the Brigham decision, which required that all students in Vermont receive substantially equal education opportunities. That's why tax dollars go from Warren to Burlington. It's not an option. It's the Supreme Court law of the land. So, but there's other, well, I'm coming, hold on, you'll get your chance. There's other parts of this. So we're once again awaiting another funding study to help us out of the morass that Act 60 and Act 68 have landed us in. In the absence of those study results, which state in the country has a two-tiered education funding system, like Vermont's, that might be adapted to Vermont's small population? And that question starts with Jean.
I don't know what that state is and what their system is.
No, I'm talking about Vermont. Brigham is Vermont.
Well, Brigham, actually, all the Supreme Court said is equal education based on dollars. And that was the wrong mistake. That was a big mistake. It didn't say how to do it. The legislators decided how to do it. So the fact of the matter is that the legislators tagged on to what the ACLU argued in regards to school taxing, which is these small towns like Warren, they have great schools. Why don't we go tax them? That was a poor decision. They should look at Burlington, $119 million budget, $31,000 per kids. That Act 68 and Act 60 and 127 were,
10 seconds.
were never intended to pay those schools. It was to fund the small schools that didn't have money.
Thank you, Jean. John?
As you said, I heard you're correct, substantially equal educational opportunity. And this is something I've researched and looked into a bit, because I think that's the job of, if I get to be in the legislature, that's what you do. What you find after Brigham, there's a lot of room for interpretation in there, substantially equal educational opportunity. When you find in Act 127, 2022, the language says fully equitable. We need fully equitable. What's the difference between substantially equal education opportunity, which you can interpret in many ways and just maybe do a little better than the foundation plan and fulfill that, and now we're on a quest for fully equitable. To me, that sounds like an impossible goal, but a good reason to just keep getting unlimited funding year after year in pursuit of this goal of making everything fully equitable. So that's part of our two-tiered system.
All right.
I'm on board with the equity need and goal that we have for all our students in Vermont, regardless of where you live. But what's been missing is accountability, and that's a problem. So we do have the big pot, and the money goes into it, and it gets doled out according to this complex formula, and we don't actually know if those outcomes are showing the investment. We don't know when we put the money in the pot and it gets distributed, we don't actually get that data back. So one of the big issues that, for me, that I think we need to work on is about accountability, and it means that our Agency of Education has to do a much bigger job than it has been able to in the past. We're going to need a lot more from them. And there's other states that have chosen to ignore the Supreme Court, and they're operating systems that are not equitable, and their time is going to come. So we're kind of leading the charge.
Time.
So I would agree with a lot of what the other candidates have shared tonight. And going back to, Jean saying that the language in Brigham, and I just made a note of this earlier, but the state must ensure substantial equality of educational opportunity throughout Vermont. So, it sounds like there is some flexibility in terms of how the state gets to that point. And, to me, that doesn't say every student must be funded at an equal level. It's talking about, equality of educational opportunity. So, I hope there's a different way to interpret that that allows us to make some significant changes in the current funding system.
Thank you. The next question we have, and we're going to start with, this is going to Candice. Oh, I'm sorry, it's going to John, I'm sorry. In June, the legislature voted to override Governor Scott's veto of House Bill 887, the yield bill, leading to an average 13.8% property tax increase. Governor Scott proposed alternatives to reduce the tax burden and utilize unspent budget dollars while settling parameters for long-term cost control. Would you have supported overriding the veto? And for Dara, why did you support overriding the veto despite these alternatives, and how you could justify the increased tax burden on Vermont residents, particularly given the governor's concern about affordability and structural reforms? And for the rest of the candidates, how would you have voted?
I would have upheld the governor's veto. Right? Okay.
That was quick and easy.
I think I mentioned it earlier as we were talking about education, that the override was necessary because the veto was a sham. It was pretend, it was theater for you guys. And to make this election sound easier for people, good people who want to run and support the state, but thinking that this is going to be optional. We have to support education. We had to pass that bill. And the alternative, which I liked the thinking, the thinking was, could we lessen the blow by spreading it out over time, 3 years? I like that idea, but our state treasurer did not, and others knowledgeable about finance said that that was like a payday loan concept that would have dug a deeper hole for us, and then we would have to be in this terrible cycle. So I had to override the veto. I had to vote against or for the override.
I feel like this is a lose-lose question. I think the yield bill was bad, and I think the governor's solution was bad too. So I don't know how I would have voted, but I didn't think that it was the right idea to take money, was it from the general fund, to pad it. That's just not a long-term solution. So the governor's solution to put some money in to just take the pain away this year, it didn't solve the problem. So it's still a major problem.
I would have voted to support the governor. And there are a number of reasons. We do already take money out of the general fund because, as I said before, 38% of the money is paid by flatlanders. We pay 28% of the funding, and that leaves a big deficit. That money comes out of the general fund. And what the governor said and what I heard was we had a windfall profit. That eclipse brought a lot of millions of dollars into the state. And he said we can take that money this year and put it in a fund to lighten our tax burden and then go forward, see what we can do. Next year, the taxes are going up. They changed the CLA, which is a goofy technician, but what CLA actually says is the Department of Taxation figures out what your house is worth, not your listers. And there's a bill 480 where the state's going to take over, wants to take over, assessing your property. And that's impossible. There are more than 300 villages and towns. Two assessors, they're going to have to hire 600 people. So the governor was right. It would have forced a better negotiation. And because we have to pay the bill, that doesn't mean we can't negotiate it down. So I would have supported the veto.
So this is our last prepared question, and then we're going to go to a couple of questions that we received from members of the public who could not be here tonight, and then we're going to go to a question from each candidate for the other candidates. So my question to you guys is, why should we elect you over the other candidates? And that starts with, I have to find my cheat sheet. Did I not tell you that was the hardest part of this? That starts with Dara.
Well, I hope I've earned the support and trust of the voters in the Valley, despite a lot of difficult issues that we're facing. I hope that you understand that there aren't any easy fixes and there's nothing simple about the solutions that we have, that many of these issues are interrelated and national in scope, but we have a lot of good thinking and good hearts in this state, and a much, much more collegiality than is being portrayed in the press. And I think we can do a lot. And I'd like to use what I've learned over the last 2 years to benefit our community. I hope I'll have your vote.
So I think that I bring a deep business experience to the job, and I think that's important. I think you need to know how to work within a budget. I think you need to be sensitive to the business community. I think that a healthy business community is directly tied to a healthy community. So I think that background will be important. I talked about my professional experience. You know, I've worked in communications, so I am a good communicator. I also believe I'm a good collaborator. I like to hear from all sides and, you know, come up with ideas as a group and kind of move forward and take the best ideas forward. You know, I think Vermont is a great place to live. I've been a big supporter of our public schools. Both my kids went through the public school system. So I will, you know, work hard and work respectfully. Thank you.
Well, I think you should elect me because, number one, I've been in business where I've solved very complicated problems across the United States and internationally. And it's a way of looking at how do you solve a problem and then tear those pieces away. We talk about housing, but we don't know what kind of houses we want to build. We don't even know who's going to be in those houses. So we need to start dissecting these problems to come up with a solution. I believe that based on my business experience, my experience in public safety and in government, I mean, I appeared before the Vermont legislature 4 times and I was successful. They listened to what I had to say because I understood the issue and how to present that issue. I presented before national conferences all over the United States. So I think my background, my passion to solve these problems and work with anybody would give me a good head up. I'm ready, if I'm elected, to hit the floor running because I
10
understand
seconds.
all these issues and I already have some people seen some of the solutions I have.
So in the Army, when the commander says go, you say, yes, sir, ma'am, and you go. Guess what my job in the Army was? I was the staff contrarian, to put it in civilian terms. I was the guy that said, wait a minute, have we thought about this? Did we consider that before we go and break things and hurt people? So that experience, I think, is needed in the State House right now, where it seems to me there's this blind following. And back to the interview with Jay Hooper, a 4-term Democrat, he's breaking the wall down and saying that's just what happens. There's less than 10 people in charge and everybody else follows. So my role, as I see it, is to go in there and to be able to say things that are uncomfortable, that need to be said, that need to be heard. And to be that change agent, that voice of dissent,
10 seconds.
because we're at a critical time where I think that's sorely needed, and I think my background, education, et cetera, has prepared me for that.
Thank you, John. We're going to go to some questions that were emailed into the Valley Reporter in the last week or so. John Stack of Warren asks, I would like to know what the candidates think can be done to regulate short-term rentals in the Valley. Some communities out west, that have faced this ever-growing problem prior to us have novel ways to deal, such as saying a certain percentage of homes in the area can be short-term, the rest have to get on a waiting list, one in, one out. I live across the street from a house that was sold by an aging couple to a corporation. Now I essentially have a hotel across the street. It is a commercial business in a residential street. I have concerns about safety, road wear, noise, community, etc. What really drives me crazy is that my taxes are going up because the value of my house has gone up because of the demand for more short-term rentals. To add insult to injury, these guys pay less in taxes than I do, since they don't have to pay certain taxes that I do. John, can I start with you?
Okay, going back to the short-term rental answer earlier, it's private property, and that's a fundamental to who we are. So it's difficult to get in and tell people how to do things, what to do with their private property. But certainly, like I said earlier, it's becoming an issue. I think the market will catch up with, and the industry will catch up with itself in terms of some regulation, some help, some fixes for people that are in need of this, that are in these situations. Other than that, is it an appeal to the owners, the homeowners, the second homeowners to, hey, be part of the community more, be a better citizen, a better steward, be a better neighbor. I think we're at an early stage of realizing the short-term rental problem is a problem, and I want to help people that are affected all I can, but there's the private property issue that we have to factor in as well.
Thank you. Dara?
Yes, Warren has done really good work thinking through this, and starting with the registry is a good idea, and then considering what a permit program would look like. I agree that homes that are not inhabited at all by the owner, that are just used for Airbnbs, are not something that we would want a lot of in our community, versus someone who has an ADU or an in-law apartment that they're using to help them pay their property taxes and put their kids through college. I wouldn't want to limit those types of rentals too much. So I think that it is very much a local decision on how to do this and how to do it fairly. And that's something that I think we'll see a lot of movement on, and we have a lot of examples we can tap.
Candice?
So I think that the person who sent that question and brings up a really good point, and it reminds me, I read something last week, like in 2023, 23 or 25% of single home sales nationwide were purchased by like hedge funds or investment banks, so like not by not by families. So there is definitely a growing problem. But, as Dara said, I think that Warren is taking the right approach, and the rest of the county will learn from that. And, once we have the data, we'll be able to make some decisions, regarding zoning and what we continue to allow. So I think that's the starting point.
Thanks, Candice.
So I agree with everybody has said. John's point to private property, but these become businesses, and all those Airbnbs, short-term rentals that are owned by corporations should be treated like a hotel. They should subscribe to all the zoning laws, all the parking laws. As a constable, people used to complain to me, these guys are parking everywhere. And when you read Warren's zoning law, I mean, it's STR, it has to be fixed, but they have the right track. Know who's buying. You treat these businesses separately. You make them comply to all the fire life safety codes. You make them register who they are and the owners. It's a way to manage them as a business. Then you have, as Dara said, the person owns a second home and they're raising money. Well, that's a little bit better because that person is going to be more responsible for their property. And then the condos manage theirs. So Warren's on the right track on how to register. And I sent him a 2-page sheet on how to fix their law.
Thank you. This next question is from Jim Tabor of Waitsfield, and he writes, candidates' personal experiences and economic backgrounds can shape their understanding of the challenges that many Vermonters face. Could you share how your own life experiences, including your professional and personal background, have influenced your understanding of the economic issues facing our community, such as affordability and the housing crisis? If you feel comfortable, You may also share how your financial situation informs your perspective on these issues. And this, we will start with Dara.
So I came here over 20 years ago to Waitsfield from Colorado with an infant and a dog and my husband. And we had a very hard time finding a place to buy. We were able to rent, but we could not find a place that we could afford in the valley. So we moved out and came back a few years later because we really liked it. So the housing problem has been real for a long time for families of modest means. And then, raising my family, I struggled to find childcare. So I did have to take a hiatus from paid work. I had to do a lot of different types of jobs while raising my family. So I think that's made me very aware of how important it is to invest in families, childcare, and affordable housing, workforce housing that we need desperately.
So when I moved here in 2003, I bought a house for $260,000. I don't know if you could get a house like that today. And shortly after I moved, I divorced my husband. So I had 2 young children, was also kind of piecing together work because I had left full-time work in Boston. I had a 1 and a 3-year-old here, and as a divorced mother of 2, it's really hard to make a living as a freelance writer. So I went back to work as soon as my son was in kindergarten, full-day kindergarten. We actually sent him to Warren for full-day kindergarten so that I could work full-time. And then I raised my kids as a single full-time working mother for 10 years. So I have a sense of some of those struggles, and I'm a big supporter of childcare, and I'll end there.
So, as I said earlier, I grew up in the Bronx on low income, family of 4 in a 1-bedroom apartment, and I didn't know I was poor until the politicians now tell me we're poor. But I had a great life, and I had to work my way. I joined the Marine Corps. They gave me an excellent education in electronics. I got out of the Marine Corps, I was an iron worker for a while, which was fun. And then I got a job fixing computers, and then I decided I needed to go to college. Fortunately, the GI Bill helped me a lot. And then I worked as a cement mason for 3 years in New York. And fortunately, I got paid good money for doing that, but I was terrible at it. So I couldn't continue my life as a cement mason, but it was good money, and I had a lot of fun and kept in shape for skiing. So I've worked my way up in corporate America as a problem solver. So I understand these issues. And again, as a cop and a firefighter, I've seen some of these economic problems firsthand, and I empathize with these people. So I think I can help solve those problems.
So when I got out of college, I decided I never want to be at the whims of a landlord. I bought a duplex in Burlington, and that was a good move. It gave me security and a place to live and a place to work on and grow. And I realized today people couldn't do that. I couldn't do that. I think everybody cannot do that. It's impossible. It is so drastically different, the financial landscape. So I think that I use that to make it helps me be very empathetic and understanding of what younger people are going through. They should be able to do that. It's a very simple thing. Start a house, raise a family, have your own home, and they just can't do it. So I guess that translates into me being, seeing the importance of allowing housing to be built. That's it.
The next group of questions are going to be ones that candidates have wanted to ask of other candidates. And the first question comes from Candice White. And this will go to, who are we going to? To Candice, okay. Please share your political party affiliation or lack thereof and explain why you have or have not aligned yourself with a political party.
So I am a registered Democrat, and that really goes back to, I think the first presidential election I voted in was for Michael Dukakis, I think, in 1988. So I'm a registered Democrat because women's issues are very important to me. Women's reproductive rights were were very important to me, and I can't believe we're still discussing this, 40 years later. But, I marched on Washington in 1989 to protect Roe versus Wade. I feel, really good about the fact that Vermont has protected a woman's right to choose in the state constitution, but clearly that's an issue nationally. So the Democratic Party, really because of their stance on women's issues, has been the party for me.
Well, I'm an independent, and honestly, about 15 years ago, I ran as a Republican for Secretary of State. And the only reason why I did that was that I went to complain about the Republicans because they weren't doing a good job, in my view. And Rob Roper said, well, then run for Secretary of State, which is fun. I got to travel around the state and actually learn issues and also learn how corrupt our whole electric system is, and it hasn't changed. And I could discuss that later. So I'm an independent because both sides seem to have these dogmas that just aren't tolerable, and to me anyway. So for me, and like John, when I was in the Marine Corps, I disagreed sometimes, and I was still a private when I got out after 4.5 years. But the point is, I believe that as an independent, I'm not encumbered by political dogma and philosophies. So that's why I'm an independent.
Thank you, Gene. John?
So I'm from a strong Democratic family. My family was in politics to some degree. I grew up with that. But it was around the John McCain era that I did not fit with the Democratic Party anymore, and I did not fit with the Republican Party, and I became independent. And I'm amazed at the amount of independence that I meet when I walk around and knock on doors. A lot of people seem to have just gravitated towards that, and maybe it is because of our two-party system seems to be very polarizing, and you have to ascribe to a certain set of beliefs, and I don't like doing that. I prefer to be independent in my thinking.
Thank you, John. Dara?
Yes, I also am a Democrat, and I don't feel like I'm swallowing some agenda. I feel like I share the values of the Democratic Party and investing in people and in communities and putting guardrails on markets and capitalism and the things that have made it difficult to have a middle class. You don't have one unless you make it. And we're not going to be the resilient community and protected environment, flourishing wildlife, and all the things that we really need unless we invest in it, unless we have a caretaking mindset. And that's what I feel the Democrats bring.
Thank you, Dara.
The next question comes from Dara, and it's for all of you, and we're going to start with Jean. Does legislative capacity in Vermont need to increase to address the increasingly complex issues we're facing in the state, for example, session length and resources? Sure. Does legislative capacity need to increase to address the increasingly complex issues we're facing in the state, for example, session length and resources?
I'm a conservative, and I believe limited government. And I believe government has to work to allow the market and people to grow. I'm a conservative, and I believe the only real difference is I believe that we can solve problems without having a big government. And we've heard that the government today wants to take over a listers. They want to take over our what we pay in our CLA, which in my view is unconstitutional. But what I think is that when we go forward, we have to look at all the issues in a small government, but a government that's smart and tuned and actually understands. Only a third of the people in the state of Vermont work. 1/3. When you start understanding that capacity, you go, whoa, how are we going to fund all this stuff at 1/3? So I don't believe that the government should be that big. I think they should be clear and focused and understand the issues and even understand the dynamics of our demographics.
Give a brief summary of the question.
Does the legislative capacity need to
Oh, my goodness, no, please no. Imagine it's anxiety producing enough when the legislature is in session in terms of what in the world are they going to try and tax next? What expenditure are they going to come up with next? Can you imagine that year round? So absolutely not. There's no reason to increase the legislative term. There's no need for a pay raise. I think they're resourced very well. Less is more. The questioner asked about mentioned that she was in favor of expansive role of government. I strongly disagree. And that ties into just who we are as a nation. We're a liberal democracy, and we're based on limited government. And when government gets out of the way, people will step in. People will do. When government does, people pull back, and they don't do.
Yes, I asked this question because I've been listening to everyone who is concerned about balance and how well our government's functioning. And I share your concerns, but I don't think balance is the issue, really. I think the issue is capacity. I think that we have a very lean government. We have a very lean administration. Our agencies are not well staffed. And then the legislature, my first term, I didn't really know what to expect. We have the Joint Fiscal Office. It's wonderful. They do good work. But, look at how complicated our education system is. Look at what we have on our plates right now. And look at how little we accomplished last term. That felt bad, knowing what everyone was going to face with their bills. We want to do more. We want to do more effectively, and I think we do need more time to do it, and we need more data and more resources and help to do the work.
Without being in the legislature, having been in there, I really feel like I can't answer that question. What I will say is that in terms of increasing resources, if that's paying legislators more, I think this is not the right time to be looking at that because we're facing so many other cost increases right now. So I would say that's not a good idea. And hearing Dara talk about, and I've heard her say this before, just addressing that there are real gaps and that they need more support. One thing I would say is I think the legislature needs to prioritize what is most important for Vermont. Like, there are a lot of great ideas, but what is most important? We've got to fix the school tax, the school financing problem. We've got to fix healthcare, affordable housing. I mean, if we do all that and do nothing else, that'd be great.
The next question for the candidates comes from Jean Bifano. Considering the supermajority's ability to ignore the governor's veto, who was elected by 70% of Vermonters, in essence removes any sort of meaningful dialogue and negotiations, and considering the devastating impact of those 12 recent veto votes will have on Vermonters and our economy, what can be done to mitigate their devastating influence?
That question starts with John.
Balance out the legislature. Hopefully, myself, Jean, Candice, a new Democrat, new faces and new thinking will come into the legislature this session and be willing to work together and move forward collaboratively, coming up with solutions that are just not, if there's no dialogue, there's no collaborative solution. And that's kind of where we're at right now.
Dara?
Again, I disagree. I think there is a lot of collaboration that happens. It could be better. It could happen sooner. It could be more efficient. But my concern is not with balance, as I said. I think the problem is that we need more firepower to address what we're coping with here. And we're not going to get it by saying that we just need new people. We need people who are empowered with information We need people who have real partners in the administration to really serve the people of Vermont and make sure that we have a thriving future.
Eric, would you repeat that question again?
Sure. Considering the supermajority's ability to ignore the governor's veto, who was elected by 70% of Vermonters, in essence removes any sort of meaningful dialogue and negations, and considering the devastating impact of those 12 recent vetoes will have on Vermonters and our economy, what can be done to mitigate their devastating influence?
When I think about what goes on in the legislature, again, I'm just observing the same way all of you are. I haven't been there, but it certainly sounds like there needs to be more regular dialogue, and we keep on saying this, but more collaboration. Like, who's in the governor's office? Are they talking with the legislators? Like, I know that they might be of different political persuasions, but they're all on the same team. They're all supposed to be working together to solve problems, to make Vermont better. So I would suggest that better communication would mitigate this, but I really don't know.
Well, I sort of agree with Dara in the fact that we talk about resources, but again, where do those resources come from? Who pays for them? We can't pay for our schools, we can't pay for our hospitals, and what we're going to do in the State House. I worked for the state for 6 months in the Department of Health in a very good program that would have saved us millions of dollars. It was the worst experience in my life. It was, I thought I was going to get an ulcer, and that's after spending 6 months in Vietnam with people pretending I'm a target. But we really have to focus on how we're going to fix that. And honestly, and I hate to be pejorative, but we have to change the amount of Democrats in the House and the Senate. And I'm not saying turn it all to Republicans, because they'll probably screw it up as well. So I just think we need to focus on who we elect. And I'm an independent, and I honestly think I know how to fix these problems.
That's a minute. Thank you, James. And this question is from John Burns. A state representative's oath includes the agreement to act as a, quote, guardian of the people. Can you describe what this means to you and provide an example of how you acted or would act as a guardian of the people? And this question starts with Dara.
Yeah, I think that's the operating principle that we all follow in the State House. We're always thinking about how are the decisions we make going to actually play out, and what do we do if we get it wrong? And it's hard to get it right every time. So I think one of the things that a guardian needs to do is be able to admit when they need help. They need to ground truth a lot with the people they represent, and they need to know how to apologize, and they need to know how to go back to the drawing board. And I think I have all of those traits, and I want to be a good guardian. Thank you.
So a guardian of the people to me means that you are representing your constituency and really looking out for their best interests in everything you do and every vote you take. And I think about some of my past experience and if it could fit into that category. But when I worked at Sugarbush, part of my job was to be in charge of kind of all of our community partners. We, donated to a lot of different nonprofits. And, a lot of the projects that we undertook at the mountain, it was important that they were good for the mountain, but we always thought about, is it good for the town? Because, the mountain and the town are so intrinsically connected. So, I think I know how to think in terms of looking at things from all angles and making sure this is going to benefit the business, this is also going to benefit the town. And in some of my nonprofit work, again, I've learned about different groups of people in Vermont in need, and all these different needs need to be considered.
Well, that was a good one. I'm glad you guys went first because I didn't even have a clue. So I think to be a guardian of the people, I think everybody has the firm understanding of our Constitution and to value the rights of every individual and to respect every individual. I grew up in an environment where my parents said, you respect everybody, but then if you don't respect them, then you don't take anything from them. So I believe the government has to respect the people and what people have to say. And honestly, I think there's been a deaf ear in Montpelier for a while. So the guardian is the person who I would represent you. I don't represent any political belief. So my job is to represent you and protect you the best I can and work with the other people in the legislature to solve some of these really big problems. So my job is to work for you and make sure we're following the Constitution of the United States.
Thank you, Gene. John?
So I would act as a guardian of the people in terms of going back to the Global Warming Solutions Act with the provision that we could be sued. No, wait a minute. Let's protect the people from lawsuits. Let's not have that in there. DMV fees, we need to raise them. DMV said we don't. Well, let's protect people from increased fees when the DMV says they don't really need them. And there's just in general, the tax increase is over the years. Let's find a way to protect people from that so they don't have to move out of the state. So it's things like that I think of. Those are ways to act as a guardian of the people. And I could also go into the Vermont Constitution too when it talks about things like moderation, temperance, frugality. These are 200-year-old words, but do they still apply? I think they do. I think that would be helpful to think in those terms, and that would further help me act as a guardian of the people to employ temperance, frugality, moderation.
Okay, we have gone through all of the questions from the audience and from that we came up with, and the candidates' questions to one another, and we're going to finish up with a closing statement from each of you, and we're going to start with Candice.
So just in closing, first of all, thank you everyone for coming tonight, and thank you Lisa and Eric. I believe that we live in one of the most amazing places in the world. Whenever I travel away from Vermont and I come back, I'm so happy to come home. So just recognizing how lucky we are, but also recognizing that we face some real challenges. Vermont, who we have in our community and the work that goes into some of our, unpaid boards, it's amazing. So I have a lot of optimism, and I believe that, we can work together. We've got to focus on what is really important, and we have some big issues, but if we work together and we worked respectfully, we should be able to solve these problems and make Vermont an even better place to live. So I hope you'll think of me when you're voting. Thank you.
Well, thank you guys for showing up and listening to us. It's better than when I was a mayor. Every now and then you'd look in the audience, there'd be nobody there, and you're always concerned when a bunch of people showed up and you go, what's wrong? But the point is, I've been coming to Vermont, again, as I said, for 30 years, and we built our house, literally built our house with our developer. My wife learned how to play with rebar and bend it for lentils. I'm going to fight to stay here because I love this place. And I think, again, if we look at the issues facing us and look at a way to solve those problems, and you just can't say we got housing, we got to spend money. We got to understand who these housing affects. Who are the people who are unhoused? And dissect these problems. We can come to solutions, but we got to remember only a third of the people in Vermont are paying, and the second homeowners are paying the rest. So I'm going to fight for you because I don't want to leave.
Thanks, Gene.
Closing statements already? Okay. Thanks for coming out, neighbor Dara. They sat us right next to each other. I decided to run in part because I know Dara's got a great heart. She wants to help everybody, much like our legislature, but we're trying too hard to help everybody. We're trying to do everything for everybody. And bigger government is not the answer. It creates more inefficiency. It frankly creates more problems. So this is kind of a calling that I heard the governor on the radio. He said, please run for office. I said, okay. I've got his endorsement, by the way. I didn't expect to be doing this right now, but I can't not do it. I hope to be able to go to the State House and be that voice that says those uncomfortable things that need to be said right now, because to me as an outsider, it just seems like it is follow the leader time, and that is not healthy.
Yes, thank you to everyone who showed up tonight and to these fellow candidates for stepping up, because there is nothing like running for office to really get to know your community and yourself. It's an amazing experience, and I'm happy that more people are doing it. And I think that's another good reason for term limits. So I would say, having served, I always knew I lived in a special place, and I've always loved the Valley in particular. But having served, I've learned so much about Vermont and its uniqueness and its fragility and its opportunity. And I'm in love with our state, and I want to keep working hard for us, because we do have the big challenges that we've been talking about, especially as one of the oldest states in the country. So a lot of the things, the pressures we're feeling, have to do with our demographics and how they've changed. And so we really do need to become a caretaking culture.
I'd like to thank the candidates first for coming: Candice White, Dara, Torre, John Burns, and Jean Bifano. And whoever you're supporting, please make sure that you come out on November 5th and vote. It's important who we elect as our legislators. I'd like to thank Shea Property Services and Valley Mead Dispensary and the Shea family for hosting us here tonight. It's good to be back in Gallagher's, isn't it? Without a bar, it's weird. But someday. And I'd also like to thank our partner here, Lisa Loomis from the Valley Reporter and the Mad River Valley Chamber of Commerce, and our members that make it all possible. And did I forget anything? Oh, yes, I'm sorry, and Mad River Valley Television. We love you guys. And there's lots of great stuff on there, so we can relive it all on Channel 44, right? Well, thanks so much for attending, everybody. Nice to see you.